Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the FIDE Grand Prix. Today is the fourth game or fourth round out of the opening 6 rounds to determine who is going to be the group winner. Very short introduction for today. The games were really fun. Even the draws were exciting. I think we had no boring games at all. So we're gonna have a blast. That's all I have to say. Get you started the right way for your work week. So the first game I would like to show you is between Hikaru Nakamura and Etienne Bacrot. Hikaru takes a trip to France quite literally because he plays into Etienne's French defense. Now, the interesting thing about this is, and you're going to see this twice in this video, when you know a guy just played an opening, it's kind of like, should you change your approach to play into his preparation, right? If you know what he's going to do, should you play directly into it? Some of you might be getting deja vu at this point because this is literally the game that happened yesterday. Andrei Yesipenko versus Etienne Bacrot. This is a flex or a power move by Hikaru. He's sending a message. He's saying, Etienne, if you're going to play into this, I will happily get to this position, because the thing is, when you begin the game with e4, you're not always guaranteed a French defense. You're also not guaranteed a classical French. You're probably going to get a Sicilian or an e5. But when you are guaranteed the same 10 moves that you just saw a guy play yesterday, which is exactly what happened, you're probably going to go for it because your homework that you have to study is a lot less. Obviously, you have to study some of the other stuff, but not as thoroughly as normal. But yesterday, Etienne played short castle against Yesipenko. Today, he plays the absolutely gangster g5. Now, if this is what he went home and prepared, kudos to the man, because g5 in this position of hundreds of games, if not close to 1,000, this has been played one time. And it was played in Paris in a rapid tournament between Peter Svidler and Jan Nepomniachtchi. Now, you might know those names. g5 is an ultra provocative move, okay? Now there are head-spinning complications. I believe Hikaru spent something like 25 to 30 minutes on his next move, and he plays knight f3. Now, if you're wondering why you can't just take this pawn, it's because you lose your grip on the center. So bishop d4, something like this, and you lose this pawn, you lose the game. You're much worse. Not a good opening adventure. So the best move for white, according to my depth 30 stockfish, which it needs a little bit more time, is to take the knight first. Hikaru plays back to f3, which has never been played before. I believe Peter actually in that game went for f5. But we have knight f3, we have d4, black's idea to throw off the coordination of white, to force white to take this pawn, and when the dust settles, we have knight e5, a nice little tactical shot. Now here, if you take the knight, there's queen h4 check. That's the point. That's the entire tactical point. The best move for white after knight takes e5 is actually to play long castle. It aesthetically looks like a very nice move. It really does. I'm actually quite curious why Hikaru didn't go for this. Knight g6 here is a good move, and after something like queen e4, looks like white's position is quite stable, but perhaps there was something Hikaru didn't like. Maybe he didn't like queen f6. I don't know. Maybe he didn't like queen g5 check, queen f4 to try to trade the queen. I don't know. Haven't spoken to him, as I always like to say. I don't speak to these players. I don't know what he didn't like. But he chooses to retreat the knight. But now knight g6 hits his queen. He backs up. And now it's time for Etienne to move his bishop somewhere. Should he go this way or this way? At this point, bishop e7 seems to be the way to go. And black will castle short. White will try to castle long by maybe like putting a bishop on d3 or the knight back to cover. You could also play rook d1. But Etienne plays bishop a7, and for the life of me, I cannot tell if this was a deliberate provocation or if he just completely missed this next move, because Hikaru can take this pawn. Now, I hate to make an assumption that bishop takes a6 was missed, but this is a very obscure tactic. And the thing is, bishop e7, this is not possible, right? Because the rook takes. So I don't think he missed it, but why didn't he put the bishop here? Right? I don't know. Maybe he didn't like knight d2 with tempo on the bishop. I don't know. I have no idea. But Hikaru takes on a6. It's just a free pawn. It's a free pawn, but black does get some activity. Black gets the castle, queen h4, and maybe in the long run, actually having the rook active with the bishop moving is not the worst thing in the world. In fact, black's activity is quite a problem because white cannot castle at all. So maybe that was the entire idea. I don't know. Once again, I have not had an opportunity to speak with either of these players. Hikaru clearly did not like the situation that was developing because he shuffled pieces back and forth and made an immediate draw. Now, If this is a must-win situation for White and you are not the group leader of the Grand Prix, you probably try to play on for a win because it's a very imbalanced game. However, in this case, the risk might outweigh the reward. Like, it might just be too risky. So Hikaru shuffles here, makes a draw. Etienne happily obliges. Actually, if anybody doesn't have to make a draw in this position, it could be Black. Like, Black can play queen back to g7, try to line up some nasty bishops. A lot of open space here, and for the cost of a pawn, it's actually an incredibly fascinating game. But surprisingly, you know, the players just call it a day right here. Hikaru maintains undefeated record, 3 draws, 1 win, 2.5 out of 4. Top of his division, awaiting the game between Grischuk and Yesipenko, which we will jump to immediately. Here we have a Nimzo Indian, bishop b4, and Grischuk plays my favorite approach. He plays e3 and a3, trying to get this bishop. And White here will put the bishop on d3, try to play for a 4-pawn attack, and then try to blow Black off the board here with the bishop, sometimes the queen, the knight, the rook. Except Grischuk doesn't put the knight on e2 and leaves this door open. Instead, he transposes. So he plays the knight to f3, and it's actually up to Yesipenko now to play this next move. He doesn't have to play d5, but he does, and we're back into ultra mainline territory. But had Grischuk played knight f3 and d5 hadn't appeared, like this had appeared, we're not really in mainline territory anymore. Black can play in a totally different approach. But we have a position that's been reached thousands of times now. Very, very mainline style position in the Nimzo. But Grischuk here plays h3 and bishop b2 and bishop e2. So from a position that's been reached about 5,000 times, now we have a position that's been reached maybe 7 times. Which goes to show you that this is obviously not the critical approach by White. White is kind of slow playing this. He's moving his bishops out of the middle. And what he wants to do in the long run is he wants to do something with the pawns. So he wants to maybe build them up. Like in a perfect world, that's just perfect world. This is just like completely winning for White. Right? I mean, White cannot just plant the pawns forward and activate his bishop, and that's a terrible situation. So Black needs to actively fight against the white pieces. You can't just let him get away with everything. So here, rook d1. Now you see rook c8, and again, d5 is not possible. But Grischuk also doesn't want to play something like de maybe, because that damages his own structure. Instead, he does something very interesting. He takes on c5 and then plays c4, and now the balance of pawns of ACE versus ACE, this is better for White. Why? Number one, White has bishops, Black has bishop, and in all openings of the position, White will be advantageously positioned. Also, when your pawns are extended too far forward, the corresponding squares are weak. White has a setup where he controls all 4 squares. So if his knight can end up on d5, White is winning. The only problem is how the hell are you going to do that, right? And if you try to play e4 supporting that, you give away d4 to Black. So we're going to have a bit of a positional jostling here. Players trade a pair of rooks. Grischuk tries to begin a maneuvering process, infiltrates with his queen, trying to maybe get some sort of commitment from Black. We have rook e6. And Grischuk in this position after the game said that he started calculating so many obscure lines that he thinks that he deserves a psychiatric test as well as a PCR test, which is kind of funny. It's kind of a critical moment in the game, like how to make forward progress. Machine here begins suggesting f3 and like just some kind of obscure moves to try to maybe play for e4, knight e3, and knight to d5. So for example, h6, maybe e4, knight e3, knight d5 potentially. But also it's even volunteering to take the knight and then maybe play for e4. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity here. Grischuk chooses to play without moving his pawn to f3 just yet. It actually takes him until move 30 to do so. But by this point, Black sort of figured out his position. So because of the constant threat of active infiltration, Grischuk is not really able to create anything with his bishop pair, and the players end up just making a draw on the 40th move after queen d1. So there was a moment in this game where Grischuk had the better structure, and he probably had to approach the position right in this moment in a little bit of a better fashion. Rather than taking and playing bishop f1, he probably had to, like I said, play for f3, just the sample variation is like knight takes g4, you can take on d7. But you can also play h takes and just have a bit of an imbalanced position with pressure here, but I guess he just slightly mishandled it and they make a draw. So Hikaru stays up top in Group A. Next game I have for you is the game between Vidit and Levon. This one is something we call a Neo-Catalan. So white does not play d4, but white could play d4, but not so fast, because black actually decides to take the pawn on c4 right away. Check, knight d7. And this position is super, super theoretical. Queen b3 and queen c2 are the main approaches to step preemptively out of the way of b5. And to my knowledge, this position has been reached still hundreds of times, but this position with bishop f4, queen a7 has never been reached. So Vidit introduces this approach of a pawn sacrifice, just giving black a pawn, but delaying black's development, and white is going to try to create initiative on the new weaknesses in the black position. However, somehow, Levon knew everything. I was looking at the time spent on the game. Like, Vidit plays this approach where he just straight up sacks a pawn, but is like, I have an attack, I have more development than you. And Levon is just, his task now is to give the pawn back and consolidate. So he plays queen b6, and it's just fascinating to me that these guys have prep everywhere. Look, Vidit plays knight e5. I mean, again, he's won a pawn back. He's about to win a second pawn back. Takes, bishop b7. Queen into e4 looks like terrifying. White's got the queen, bishop, other bishop, pawn, rook, everybody pressuring, short castle in a moment. Levon very confidently just trades bishops, castles. His knight is hanging. He obviously couldn't move it because the rook is under attack, and everything clears off, and Vidit actually does get a pleasant looking position because he has queenside pressure here on the A and C pawn. So Vidit's prep is really good. Like, Vidit comes to the table super, super well prepared. But the thing is, in all these positions, you might not get advantage, but you might get a slightly more pleasant game. And it's up to Levon to sort of figure this out. He tries to come in actively on the queen side, looking for a queen trade. Vidit plays rook a3. It might have been better for Vidit to actually go for an endgame like this. Like, Vidit could consider doing this and just walking his king over. That actually is an option here, and computer loves this for white. It loves the concept of king f1. For example, like, let's just say black also tries to bring the king. King e2 here, rook d7, rook c7, or rook d7, rook b7. Very active play by white, and just tough to break through here for black. So this might have been Vidit's kind of one moment in the game. You know, you use your prep, you have that moment, but as we see in this top level, sometimes if you don't seize that opportunity and your opponent is able to consolidate, pieces get cleared off the board, and well, even at the damaged structure here, if you count the pawns, they're equal. So black has the active rook. Look at that. He sacks the pawn on c4 in order to infiltrate on this rank. And even though the pawns are bad, the king protects them all. So 3-on-3 is just a draw. Maybe not in your games, but in their games, absolutely. And the players make a draw. So yeah, Vidit in this game went for a very, very forcing piece of preparation. Levon kept his cool and found a moment to equalize the second that he got it. Vidit basically missing one chance to trade some stuff and play king f1. And I would be willing to bet Vidit didn't do this for a reason. I don't know. Bishop f6 potentially. I don't know. But maybe he didn't like something here. He thought this pawn might be a bit of a liability. But this is actually very good for white because you're fast. You're just very fast here. Rook b1, king d2, king c3. You're actually just winning because you're going to win both pawns. So, I don't know. Again, don't get a chance to speak to the players. Vidit misses a slight chance to get an advantage there, maybe. But nothing, you know, too crazy. Now, this game in Group B between Report, who has come to fight every game, and Wojtaszek, who's been... Oh, I put Wojtaszek as Russia. Why did I... Wait, what? Wait, I also put the picture of Fedoseev. Oh my god, that's just absolutely not who... Wait a minute. Okay, all right. Some live editing here. I mixed up my players. What the heck? Give me a sec, folks. I've never done this in the middle of a recap. I'm gonna... What? I accidentally made this guy Fedoseev. Did I completely messed that up? Okay, Wojtaszek and Poland. Well, I can't imagine what I did in the other on the other game. Sometimes I sit here and I try to prepare the games ahead of time, and I guess I just made a mistake. Wow, oopsies. All right, well, this is absolutely Report Wojtaszek. Fedoseev did not play against two people. So we have whatever the hell this is. This is a London Queen's Gambit. This is a guy who doesn't know whether he wants Thai food or pizza, so he orders both. I'm talking about myself. Not really. I don't eat that much. So the funniest thing is, by move 5, we have a game that's almost never occurred. Just almost never, because no one plays like this. It's just a very strange move order to develop, you know, your bishop before your knights, but okay, whatever. We have, I'm still so amazed. I have no idea what I put for Fedoseev. I hope I didn't put 2 Fedoseevs. And we get a game of just an imbalanced pawn structure. So the players develop. Now that move c5, right? If you've been wondering why b7 hasn't been taken, it's because rook b8 and rook b2, a little bit unpleasant. Also, knight b6 can lock the queen in after it gets over there. We get a game that looks like this. So, positionally speaking, folks, what's going on here? Black has what we call an isolated pawn. It's a pawn that doesn't have any neighbors, no c and e. Isolated pawns are good when you have activity around them, so you use the open space, the open lines around the pawn, and maybe you try to trade it off or use it as a hook or as a kind of defensive mechanism to plant one of your pieces more actively. And the guy playing against the isolated pawn wants to trade all the pieces and attack it. That's what he wants. So what we're going to see in blockade it. So what we're going to see now is a guy offering exchanges and blockading the isolated pawn. So Wojtaszek has a bit of an annoying task in front of him here. He goes knight e6. He's looking to remove the blockade. He ends up trading. Looks like white has an advantage. Absolutely, white has an advantage. White is better. Totally. 100%. White is kind of succeeding here. Maybe he's going to try to pressure like this. Black, on the other hand, is trying to do what people with an isolated pawn do. It's trying to be active around the pawn. Report here repeats moves, but not actually because the pawn moved up. And then offers his opponent a queen trade, voluntarily damaging his structure to open up the A file. So an interesting approach here. G4 takes a little bit of space, improving on both sides of the board without overcommitting. H5 here, not very scary. You can take, you can push, probably. You can also just play F3. So very slow improvement on 2 sides of the board. Knight E4 is what I talked about, using that pawn as kind of a lever, so that if bishop E4, DE4, there's nothing special there, right? So rook D1, and we have a trade. Knight goes back to D6. And yeah, I mean, Wojtaszek is doing a great job. He's using that pawn as an asset for himself rather than a liability. A little bit later in this game, Report sacks a pawn. And actually, if you count the numbers here, he's a pawn up. He's a pawn up. Wojtaszek is just a pawn up. But white is better. White is better because he's just got way more activity. I mean, the rook is a menace. This rook is a menace, and these pawns suck. And this rook is just it's a defender. It's not aggressive. Everything is very well protected. And what ends up happening in this game is Rapport wins back both pawns. So he wins the D pawn and he wins the B pawn in a moment. You're gonna watch that B pawn collapse. But Wojtaszek is smart. And this is the level of the game that he's playing. He's a strong 2700. He goes from a pawn up to a pawn down, but forcing a drawn rook endgame. It's just a drawn rook endgame. So very nice technique, good defensive technique. Drawn rook endgame because no pawn is going to make it through. This pawn is always a liability. And just so you understand, like, I'm not playing rook c6 because there's this. So I just have to be careful not to make a silly mistake and lose this pawn and give white winning chances. Black just stays active. Pawn is blockaded. The white king can't get close. Hashtag Chael Sonnen, right? Can't let him get close. I've made that joke before, but yes, I'm a big MMA fan. And now that rook f4 is not possible because the king is there, you win the pawn. So good hold by Wojtaszek. Can't complain. And the 5th game that I have for you on the before the decisive games is Harikrishna versus Shirov. Now this was a long game. It was a Ruy Lopez, so you know it's going to be a long one. And it was a wild Ruy Lopez, so it was a game that featured Shirov coming for this bishop and then attacking the center. So both sides here, Shirov, look at this. Nice little crown in the center of the board. Harikrishna here backs up, sniping at the center with the pawn, the knight, potentially the rook. Shirov did a very nice job here of kind of putting his bishops behind the pawns, making sure everything was nice and solid. But Shirov needs to kind of get out and be aggressive, and you're going to see him do that in a moment. His queen goes for a little jog out here in a sec. And actually, Pentala got exactly what he wanted. This was the incorrect approach to this position, and Harikrishna, at the sacrifice of a pawn here, could have swarmed black. He could have played knight h4. Giving this pawn away and going for knight to f5, queen to g4, rook to d7, and all the pieces swarm because this bishop cannot play a defensive role for black. Knight h4 was the critical decision here to go for a big attack. I'm not saying it's winning, but like I said in that Levon Vidit game, sometimes that's all it takes. Instead of that, he gobbled, and the game took a much different nature, right? You see white focusing on the queen side. Rook d1 is a very flashy move. If you take, then queen takes queen. That doesn't happen. We get a bit more of an endgame, and yeah, Hare Krishna still continues to apply pressure, right? He's got the a-pawn on the outside. e5 is looking a little bit delicate. Shirov here trades and tries to play an endgame where he's a clean pawn down, right? Rook e4. Right now, again, probably this is the way to go. So just get the 3-on-1. So like, for example, rook a4 here. Get the 3-on-1 on this side of the board and try to win it. Hari instead goes for the c5 pawn, but after bishop b6 and bishop f2, this is not the right configuration to play this position for a win. And the game goes on for 30 more moves from this kind of situation. So Hare Krishna either had to attack a little bit earlier or get that endgame. I'm not saying those were easy. I'm just telling you that chess is like that. In a 79-move game, 76-move game, 2 moments for white to potentially take advantage. This is the right setup that you got to go for. And you try to attack this pawn before it gets too active, and you have a 3-on-1 situation on this side of the board. That doesn't happen. Instead, we get like a equal pawn situation and 1 on the other side. White is unable to get this pawn rolling. Ayo, cops, I'll be out in a minute, all right? Getting arrested because I'm just too damn good at these recaps. King d3, and we have, you know, a little bit of action over here. Players end up trading this game all the way down to king versus king, as that king goes to hunt down the rook. The black pawn makes it all the way down, and this is a very, very standard draw. Yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, like you've seen throughout these recaps, that's just sort of what happens. Games don't always make it all the way to their conclusion. Well, no, I mean, like, the advantage doesn't get proven in a game, but games do make it down to a conclusion at some point. Now, I'm terrified of what we're about to discover, but I hope Fedoseev is somewhere here. Ah, there he is. Okay, so I just basically gave 2 Fedoseevs for some reason. So, Biden versus Fedoseev was an interesting one, but a bit of a tragic affair. So, we got kind of a sideline of the Sicilian, right? White doesn't go for an open Sicilian, so Fedoseev plays e5, which is an ultra-committal move, forcing the nature of the game. It's going to be a very closed maneuvering game, as you're about to see. The players prevent each other from getting any sort of advantage in terms of pawns. Knight d7 is a jostling type of move, looking to trade the bishops. White's like, no, I'm good. I don't want to trade any pieces with you. Now my knight is on d5, and black tries to trade the knight off right away. White does that. Light squared bishop looking quite nice, trying to build up for a potential d4. Black plays king h8 to get out of the way and advance with f5. White is trying to take space on the queen side. So in close positions, a lot of pawn battling, right? b5 is a locked decision. Knight goes back to d8. Now, I'm willing to bet that at some point we get to play the move f5. Oh, wow! How the hell did I know that? f5, there it is. And my man Biden, for some reason, just really likes to play h5, h4, h5. If you go through his games, he plays h4, h5 like in every game. And, you know, basically, I kind of think his idea here is to do this and win, right? Because the king is cut off, so hg, it's mate. Like bishop h4, it's mate. I'm assuming that was his idea. That is why he played h5. So Fedoseev trades off his light squared bishop. He's like, well, you're not going to mate me if I trade off your diagonal attacker. Queen d7. And here, Biden went nuts. Like, off the deep end crazy. My man played king d1. Now, king d1, I don't know what the point of this move is. Like, I don't know. I guess he wanted some king c2 and maybe a rook e1. And I don't know. I don't know what the point of king d1 is. It almost looks like an over-the-board mouse slip. And Fedoseev's like, chop, 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 infiltration. Like, I don't... Take, queen g4, I'm attacking g2. How are you going to defend it? Biden at this point is like, well, I could go king c2, but then if he takes, this is hanging, so that doesn't quite work. So now I'm going to go back with my queen, so that if he takes, I go here, and now I use the g-file against him. Fedoseev's like, okay, and what if the second you move your queen, I attack it? So that if you take, your knight's not guarded anymore. Queen e3, and now Fedoseev's like, what about my knight? Like, I got a pawn, you didn't take, so I'm going to go knight c5, knight d3. That's exactly what happens. Well, knight f4, knight d3. That knight ends up on d3. Guys, what is happening with this white king? King d1. King c1. King c... Fedoseyev's just playing moves, and I don't know. I don't know. Knight f5, and here Fedoseyev's like, my rook is worth as much as that knight. I mean, that knight is really powerful. Now I have threats on this king. Is the king gonna move again? No, we decide to attack the queen. Okay, queen doesn't even have to move because double check and infiltration, and the knight will come back to d3 or c2 in a moment. Yeah, I almost feel bad for showing the entirety of this game. I mean, this is just brutal. Like, I don't know. I don't know, folks. Yeah, there's no back rank mate, by the way. Nice coverage, and yeah, I mean, Fedoseyev wins. Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, Biden had a very normal position, and within 5 moves, it was -10. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. Really, I don't know. Okay, next game. I'm getting sad. Ledope versus Wesley So. This is a mammoth matchup in Group D. One of these two guys is going to win Group D. Harakrishna and Shirov are extremely good players, but these guys are a cut above. They're 2760, 2770. Wesley So, former almost 2800 rated player. Like, these guys are a little bit a cut above, so this is a huge game. Who's going to win this one? Well, it's only fitting that these guys play into a line that was played in the World Championship. So they are using World Championship prep. And Jordan Van Forest played this against Karyakin and Tarastil. That game had knight a3. Jordan put his bishop on b8. So in this game, we get a slightly different approach. We're also now following the game Aleksienko versus Carlsen from World Championship of Blitz in Warsaw, Poland. Knight e7, knight g6, and a big maneuvering battle, the first trade of which occurs on move 15. ED, knight d4, takes, and d5. Okay, what the heck is going on? Black has given up the bishop pair, so we have 1 bishop versus 2, but Black is basically saying, at some point you'll have to give this up because my knights are too strong. This is a very common outpost square, f4, f5. Where did we just see the f5 square? Were you paying attention? Harakrishna, Shirov, e4, e5 games, particularly Ru Lopez. f4, f5 is a $1 million square. That's the stuff you learn in the Gotham recaps in between snorting water all over yourself while you laugh, or snorting other things. Can't say I recommend that, but, you know. So, queen f3, queen f6, bishop back to d1. Are you really going to tell me that this bishop pair is scaring anybody? Wesley is not so convinced. Wesley is not so convinced. I really should go to jail. Queen h4, bishop d2, c6. The black position, ultra solid. Boop, 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 boop. Maybe future sacrifices over here. Black's got a really annoying bind. And sometimes in positions where there's a very annoying bind, the guy who's in the very annoying bind, in this case, Ledope, gonna struggle to kind of deal with further pressure, and Wesley applies it. f5. Now, to my eyes, e5 is, you must play this move. f5, e5, you must play it, because this bishop is officially locked out of the game. However, there is a crazy tactical shot here, knight takes g2, and the point is that if you just play something like king g2, I have queen d4 hitting this and a fork. There is this, and you have to calculate it, but queen g2, there is f4, and now the bishop is reactivated, the rook is reactivated, terrifying position. f5, e5, though, has to be played. Like, you have to calculate all that and make sure it's okay, because this is your alternative, and the pieces are just way too active. I mean, to my eyes, I'm not in the Grand Prix, but when I see f5, this is I played this in 2 seconds. I mean, maybe I lose after knight g2, but I played in 2 seconds. You know what the craziest thing is? e5 is +1, according to Stockfish, which is, I wonder what Lanier missed. I wonder what he missed. I don't know. Again, just like I don't know in some of these, I don't know. He decides to give Wesley everything, and he opts to trade queens, and now there's a fork. And I suppose his idea here was this, right? So that if you take the rook, I go here. But if you follow this variation after rook to f2, if you take on d3, I take the bishop, right? So Lanier went for this variation. Bishop takes g6. He didn't have to do this. This is just a losing rook and pawn endgame. Black just has too much activity. And Wesley brings the rooks down. Rooks on the second rank, folks. Rooks on the second rank. Now, white can do the same, but one guy is faster than the other. And the other thing is, the other guy can run. If the king can escape, like he's trying to box in his king, it's not going to quite work. If the king can run, you just lose. And yeah, I mean, Wesley just creates checkmate threats, and that's it. White resigns, down 3 pawns. Shocking. An almost effortless victory for Wesley So. I mean, beautiful game by Wesley, honestly. F5 was just an exceptional move. And like I said, when you're in an unpleasant situation and it seems like it's completely about to get out of control, sometimes you struggle to deal with that change in the position. And sometimes the reverse, when you have a bind and you try to get aggressive, you open yourself up to counterattack. And apparently after e5, like, Black's position is really good. Black just has to find a way to consolidate and get like a really good... But yeah, I mean, e5 visually just looks so promising. I really wonder what Lander didn't like, right? Because knight takes g2, you got to calculate all this stuff. I don't know. Maybe he didn't like it. There's something he didn't like. He went for this, and Wesley got everything. And when everything cleared out, he was just in a winning rook and pawn endgame. And he wins. And Wesley now leads Group D with 3 points out of 4. And the last game that I would like to show you, and thank you for making it 30 minutes into this recap. I know these recent Grand Prix recaps have been long, but hopefully you guys are enjoying. This is a beautiful game. Daniil Dubov versus Vincent Keimer. Remember how Hikaru played e4, which he might not usually play if he doesn't know that his opponent is going to play a certain opening? When you play Vincent Keimer with white, you know you're going to get this. He's kind of like me, except taller, far more talented at chess, probably gets better grades in school. So, not quite. I got a nice YouTube channel, though. d4, d5, and we have an advance variation. Now, you remember, in this tournament, we've already seen knight d2, knight b3, Leiner versus Hare Krishna, and we also saw the exchange Karo Khan played against Keimer. Keimer not dissuaded whatsoever and plays into a mainline short variation. Now, the following moves will look familiar to you. Bishop e3, queen b6, and all of this. Now, again, Black does not take the pawn here because of knight to b5. Knight b5, knight c7. The queen isn't trapped, but there's too many threats. You can always take on c5, threatening to trap the queen at any moment. Also threatening to play knight d4. It's a disaster position. You can't actually take on b2 just yet. You have to play knight c6. So, castles, queen b2. All of this, all of these moves have been seen in the game Shirov Hare Krishna. All of them, bishop b4. But in that game, rook b1 was the choice, which is one of the moves. In this game, Dubov plays knight b5, which has been played before. It has been played before, defending the knight and threatening all sorts of stuff over here. We have bishop a5, rook b1, queen c2, rook c1, queen b2. The reason I'm not slowing down is because all of these moves have been played probably about 30, 40 times. There was also a game Caruana in his legendary winning streak, Sinkfield Cup, my video called The Greatest Chess Winning Streak of All Time, which you've all obviously seen, versus MVL. Knight a4 is a move that's been played 11 times and has a win rate of 73%. Black has never won after knight a4 has been played. Never. According to my database, never. Maybe like in a blitz game, so maybe one time in a blitz game. But in classical chess, knight a4, only white has ever won, and it forces the following sequence. Takes, there's a fruit fly in my room. There's no fruit in here. Maybe I'm the fruit. Huh. Knight d6, king e7, knight b7. All these moves have been played before. All of these moves have been played before. There was one game played in between Sarana and Rozum, I think, Russian tournament, and that game featured knight h6. 20 moves of theory played by Daniil Dubov. Rook b8 is the move chosen in this game by Keimer, who did not know about that game, because knight h6 is the only move. Here's why. You have to develop quickly with knight h6, f6, and knight back to f7. So for example, you have to play for f6, and then you have to play for knight f7 to counteract the incoming positional assault. The move rook b8 allows white to play knight c4, and you are now too slow to deal with this knight on d6. Now, what Keimer probably wanted here was this. So at least the knight on d6 is not creating a threat, and now his idea is knight e7, knight c8, or knight e7, knight f5. So that's the way he was going to deal with it. But you don't have to play rook b8. Rook b8 is one tempo too little. You need the knight out immediately because all of this happens, and Dubov finds rook d4, and even though you get to play knight e7, Dubov just goes here and is like showing a giant middle finger to Keimer. Like, he plays g4, presses the clock, writes the move down, and just boom. And Keimer's like, he can't do that. And Dubov's like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. So now, if knight c8 is played, the idea is the absolutely exceptional rook b4. If you take, I take, and I win your rook. Rook b4 is a beautiful idea. And when you are faced with a move like rook b4, when you notice that after knight c8 there is rook b4, you're kind of going to struggle a little bit. You might have to play king d7. And then rook and I mean, it looks like your position's falling apart. Apparently it's not. Apparently it's not after rook b5. You have to sack the rook. Sack the rook, go rook b8, and focus on the positional liabilities that white created for himself in trying to restrict the movement of your pieces. Sometimes you flinch too hard, right? And that's when you can hurt yourself, right? So rook b8 was the idea, but Keimer plays rook b6. One move too late. Bishop b5. And I think at this point, Keimer realized he can't move his king. Can't move it. He can't do anything. Got absolutely no moves. And when you have absolutely no moves, white is going to do whatever the hell he wants to on the chessboard. Rook a4, knight goes back to c8, because there is no rook b4 anymore. The bishop blocks it, but it doesn't matter. Takes, rook a7. Beautiful. Look at this. He sacks the rook. Rook d7 is mate. How do you stop that? Rook c7. And you have to give away your other rook. Rook e8 is now mate once again. So rook f6. Rook c8 forces a trade. I mean, you can play rook a7, but I come back to c6. You cannot take, because rook c7, then I take the pawn. My king is always safe on the back rank. Rook a7, rook c6, and Vincent Keimer resigned. We are really seeing the struggles of a gentleman who is a very, very strong 2650 player, but he is trying to throw the Caro-Kann out against absolute chess goons, chess geniuses. And in the last two rounds, Aranyan and Dubov have really punished the Caro-Kann. Really punished it. And I had a game almost very similar to this when, after 18 moves of theory, this was 20, but after 18 moves of theory against Nicholas Huschenbeth, there's actually a video, he made it on YouTube, where he remembered like 18 moves of theory, and I remembered 17. And I lost like basically on the spot. And that's just the brutal nature of some of these Caro-Kann variations. So Dubov wins in Group C. The problem for Dubov is he's in a group with Levon Aranyan, who's in first place. So the group leaders after 4 rounds, Hikaru Nakamura. Group B has a tie between Wojtaszek and Fereseyev. Report is half a point behind them. Levon and Wesley So, the leaders of Group C and D, respectively. And also respectfully. Folks, it's been a pleasure making 4 days of recaps for you. Tomorrow we have a rest day. I don't even know who's even... Write a comment if you even heard that tomorrow is a rest day in the comments. Write a comment. If you even heard 38 minutes into the recap. I feel like I'm talking to myself at this point. Although I am in all my videos. Anyway, I'll see you for round 5. Get out of here.